Welcome to a brand new episode of the LEX podcast. The Leaders in Employee Experience is a platform where we talk to industry leaders about all the cool things that are happening in the area of employee experience, whether it is related to culture, whether it is related to process or technology. Very happy to have here Fred Carstens on the show today. Fred and I have known each other for 9 years now, and one of the most thorough HR professionals. But there is a lot of other interesting kind of elements to Fred's personality, which obviously I won't steal Fred's thunder and I'll let him talk through those. Fred is now doing interesting stuff. He chose to retire. And I kind of still can't believe he's retired. I don't think he is retired, but he's doing work as an independent consultant, but he chooses the kind of work he likes to do. And he's also big time into many other things, including sports and fitness. So before in his professional roles, Fred is a two-time ex-CHRO, has spent a lot of time in the Middle East, in UAE and in Kuwait. Last two roles have been CHRO roles in Adib in UAE and in Kuwait Finance House. And before that, senior roles at National Bank of Kuwait and Commercial Bank of Dubai. And before that, I think in Sub Saharan Africa. So welcome, Fred. Welcome on the show. Now that the audiences know the professional background about you, why don't you tell us about all the cool stuff you are doing
Wow.
outside of the professional boundaries?
Oh, thanks, Nashith. It's great to be here. And I can't believe it's almost been a decade of working together when we started uh, changing the world at Commercial Bank of Dubai. Today, I'm very, very fortunate that I can choose to do HR advisory work. I like the leadership coaching piece. I think the journey, certainly in the Middle East, took me to a place where I believe not only HR leaders, but leaders in general have almost a responsibility to make the workplace human, which means culture, which means leadership, which means engagement. So I play in that space now, which is quite nice. I work with senior people who really want to make a difference, which is nice. You don't have to browbeat and force people to make a difference. You talk to them to make a difference. So that's nice. I'm in Kuwait as you see me at the moment, but hopefully back in Mauritius in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so let's get started about employee experience and what it means for you and what you've seen it in action and in organizations that you've been associated with. Now, obviously, customer experience has been front and center for a long time now, and gradually the HR function is opening up to employee experience. A lot of organizations are already quite advanced in terms of how they look at the whole employee relationship and that whole kind of equation. So what has been your experience with organizations that are trying to kind of get into the employee experience journey?
I think so. I think first we need to move away from organizations that try and do engagement surveys once a year, present something to the board to say, look, we've got an okay workforce, everyone's okay. There has to be an intention every day to create moments that matter. And I know that's something that's important for you. You use moments that matter a lot. But I think if we just step back and think about the four things that employees today want. So employees want flexibility. I think specifically post-COVID and where the world is going, that sort of understanding that I do my best work, not always at my desk, sometimes with colleagues, sometimes somewhere else. So flexibility. I think the second thing is a shared purpose. Employees genuinely want to be associated with organizations that stand for something that they can relate to, that they can be proud to be associated with. The third thing for me is well-being, not just fruit baskets or lectures, but an intention every day that everything I do is to the benefit of the employee and the organization. And employee health and organizational health share a symbiotic relationship. So you have to. And I think lastly around a people first experience. If you go away from come to work, there's a professional relationship, leave, and you then go to your private life. It's now a people first experience. Everything I do, employees want to genuinely understand that they treated as an individual, not as an employee. So if you then understand that's what employees want, what do you as a leader, or what do you as an organization do? So as a leader in the old days, you used to say, I have a professional work environment, employees interact with each other, and I look for efficiency. Where if you take where employees are going, you now have leaders that genuinely enable self-expression, that say that people need to address their life needs in work, and you have individualized, tailored experiences. So I think I'll pause here and say that your job as a leader now is to create space around you for others to grow, and you need to remove barriers so that employees can come to work and be the best version of themselves. That for me is where experience is today.
So I'll pick on two kind of important threads from there. The first is continuous listening or effective listening. Like you mentioned about the days of the once in a year survey, which is basically a checkbox, is not necessarily going to help organizations make that real change. And the second is about the personalized experiences and unblocking the kind of barriers. So let's talk about the first part, which is about the continuous listening piece, and how can organizations truly benefit from continuous listening without necessarily tying themselves down into, earlier I was doing one survey, now I'm doing 6 surveys, or I'm doing one survey every day. But the whole focus kind of being on doing the survey, finding a benchmark, comparing yourself with the company across the street, to actually looking at how do we actually improve the workplace.
So intention and intentional culture. And let me explain what I mean by that. So in the past, a organization's culture was determined by the physical workspace. You know, what did the office look like? What does parking look like? What does the cafeteria look like? Is there a coffee room? You also had specific ways that the organization behaved. I created a job, and that was the culture, the way we do things now. In this new, and I'm going to use the word hybrid at the risk of sounding like a cliche, but there is a new world of work. Employees interact different. So the building or the cafeteria is no longer a place where culture can be expressed. The only place culture can be expressed is when leaders and managers are interacting in the job specifically with employees, when employees are interacting when they're delivering a particular task. That must become the time where you're continuously listening. So every time you're interacting with employees, so if your intention is always to remove barriers, always to make it easier for employees to do their job, always to create space for others to grow, then you're constantly listening, you're constantly interacting, and you understand that it's not the building that creates the culture, but it's how I interact with my employees that is creating the culture.
And let's talk about the personalization element, right? Because this is something that many people in HR have been kind of thinking about for a decade, right? But unfortunately, we've not been able to get down to that path of actually personalizing experiences. So what is it that organizations should do in order to eventually get to that phase of hyper personalized, or at least personalized experiences?
I suppose it's not so much what you can do, it's what your intent is. So where do you start? So I think HR professionals try as much, because HR professionals, and I fell into that trap as well, is you want to treat everyone fairly, which means you treat everyone the same, which is unfair. So which you can't do. So instead of saying I'm creating a policy that treats everyone the same, why don't you say, I create a framework where people can be treated fairly? It may not be the same. So whether you do performance management, whether you do learning and development, whether you do engagement, it's not about the input, but it's about the output. So instead of saying, giving everyone the opportunity to perform, why don't you change the language to giving everyone the opportunity to contribute, so that you become outcomes based? I know it's easier said than done, because you want compliance and you want all the rest of it. But if you change your mindset, if you change the departure point, then the end point is a lot easier to get to.
Right. So let's kind of focus on that contribution, and I want to bring in the element of culture, and within that, one specific thing that I think you are in a great position to speak about with your kind of multiple talents in sports. Like, so when we talk about an environment where people can contribute and be successful, I think nothing comes close to that than high performing sports psychology and how elite sports people think. And you've kind of played many sports, from what I remember: cricket, rugby, golf, running, and serious level of sport, like not the I would do it when I have time kind of sport, but like proper serious sport. So what can we learn from high performing sports psychology and high performing elite athlete mindset and bring that to the workplace? And how would that culture look like?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and don't underestimate the hard work that you have to put in. So we always used to joke that it's not as easy as we make it look, because there's a lot of hard work, and it's the same with leaders. And then how do you pass that on to employees? How do you create that space? To be a leader is hard work. It's not. So how do I find a way to ensure that I look out for moments that matter? How do I make sure that I create an opportunity for employees to grow here? So, and it would be very easy to take your best employee to constantly do the tasks that are difficult. So if you change that again and say, use the job to develop the employee, don't use the employee to develop the job. There are going to be times where employees are going to hate you. There are going to be times where employees are going to have to work late, work on projects that are really difficult. But I think as long as the intention is there, as long as the intention is that I'm doing this so that we as an organization can get better, so that you as an individual can grow your skills. So being honest around it's still hard work is important, but it doesn't mean that the hard work doesn't have to be fun. You and I have worked very late nights and still had fun. You know what I mean? You can still have a high level of focus and intensity, but have fun doing it. You know, so if you think about high performing athletes talk about being in the flow, where things are happening almost as an out of body experience. You know, I'm not working hard, but that comes from, you know, hitting 1,000 golf balls or running, you know, 21K marathons so that you can run a really awesome time in a marathon. There is hard work, but the harder you work, the more fun it is when you achieve.
Yeah, they can't be high intensity without fun. But then it becomes drudgery, then it becomes a little bit of a chore, and you want to run away from it, not run with it or for it.
Yeah.
So any kind of anecdotes, stories from the sport field that can be applied onto the work field?
Well, you know, if you think about, so I always use the analogy that knowledge work is an endurance sport. And what do I mean? What do I mean by that? So, and most of, or certainly the industries and the environment I've worked in, where you've had professionals that bring a lot of their intellectual capability to their job. Now, there are a lot of people that proudly say to you, listen, I spent 12 hours working on this. And I'm saying, why? You could have done it in 6 hours. And they say, why? I said, so if you think about the Tour de France, cyclists that do the Tour de France do not go at 110% of their capacity for the month. There are times where you work really hard, then there's times where you rest and you recover. And the easiest way for me to explain this to individuals is when we did the wellbeing initiative with Great Finance House. We had the top leaders. Not only did they have coaches, but we also, what we called was the VO2 max. So we tracked their heart rate and when they're expending energy. And it was interesting that when you work too hard, or when you think you should be putting a 12-hour shift, your productivity actually decreases. So instead of saying, I'm going to work 6 hours, I'm going to take a break for 2 hours, and I'm going to work another 2 hours, you get the same amount of work done. So the same, I think, once you understand that concept, you can bring it back to the work process. And I remember, Nashith, you always told me that I'm a lazy person. So if I can find a way to do it easier, I will. That's what I mean by knowledge work as an endurance sport. So yes, I can train, but make sure that I'm doing the most critical work when I'm the fittest to be able to do the work. And that flows over. So look after yourself, take a break, you know what I mean, rest. Coffee is not the answer. Coffee's a nice answer, but it's not the only answer.
Right. But let's broaden this to broader well-being, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of now spoken about work, and you've kind of given in a live example of how the kind of breaks and kind of rest and recuperation actually help a person improve their actual performance. But how about kind of the broader well-being element in terms of how organizations are approaching it? What's wrong in it? Because one of the things that I always kind of joke around with my friends in HR is that a lot of times I've seen a very toxic work environment, and then you're given 20 minutes of yoga to kind of forget about it. So obviously that's not the well-being that is sustainable or long-term.
No.
It should be something which is part of the culture and not a bolt-on. So how can we integrate and weave in well-being into the day-to-day working of an organization rather than look at it as a bolt-on option?
That is such an important topic for me, and I wish organizations would get this quicker. So there is no one size fits all. That's the first thing. A couple of points are important though. Is one, and I'm going to start from the bottom and work upwards. So from the bottom, it's got to be holistic. So it's not just yoga and podcasts. It's mental well-being. It's nutrition. It's physical well-being. It's mobility. It's even spiritual well-being. You know what I mean? It's
financial well-being as well.
Financial well-being is very, very important. So whatever you do has got to be holistic. The second thing is well-being mustn't be seen as something to fix something. It's not something to fix something. It's a way of life. So it must become an intention for the organization. For some people, it's, once a week I want to come in late because it's my turn to drop the kids off at school. Or maybe once a week I want to work at home for the first 3 hours because I do my most creative work when I'm alone and the kids are at school. Or maybe it's a case of, once a month I want to take a long weekend because that's how I recharge. So it's whatever works for whoever. It's not to fix something. It needs to fit into something. And the third thing that's probably crucial for me is if you start thinking of well-being in terms of dollars or KDs or rands or rupees or whatever currency you're working in, you're making the mistake. What you should realize is that you can't afford not to do it. So it doesn't matter what it costs. You need to build that into your HR structure, because the return that you get far outweighs what you're going to spend. So if you're just trying to tick it the same way you tick an ESG box, you're making the mistake. And employees see through that. Employees will see, well, it's just another podcast, it's just another yoga class. Yoga class doesn't work for me because I have to pick up my kids after school. But what will work for me is if once a week I can come in late, as an example. You know what I mean?
So that's an important point, because I can relate it back to something we've just discussed, which is about personalization.
Yeah.
Because the examples you gave are all where the manager has to be conscious of the personalized nature of interaction that they have with each employee, because
Mm,
you would be happy getting Tuesday morning 3 hours for creative time, and I would possibly need a Friday afternoon to kind of drop my kid off to a class. And in many cases it doesn't cost the organization a penny, nothing at all, right? But at the same time, there's also this mindset that we've kind of, some HR functions or some organizations still carry, that we don't want to deal in gray. It's got to be
mm,
black, right? So I won't allow this because then I have to allow this for everyone else, and then I don't know how it reminds me of how it was uh, in the middle part of my career, where in an Islamic bank we introduced jeans.
mm,
Right. We introduced jeans and t-shirts on a Thursday, which was the last day of the weekend. And initially it was so bad that our dress code policy was in PowerPoint, because we had to show images of what is appropriate and what is not
mm,
appropriate. And yet I would get complaints about this person not being dressed appropriately or that person not, to the stage that some managers said we'd rather go back to the suit and the tie and the shirt and
mm.
the whole formal thing, because it's not worth it. So when do we understand whether it's worth it to have that kind of flexibility and personalization, and where it becomes a bit of a nuisance or we don't want to deal with it?
I listen. So the one thing I forgot to say, and I apologize, is you set the tone at the top. So your leadership culture, and that's why I spoke so much about the leader's role to ensure personalization, to treat me as a person. If you built the right leadership culture, then these issues will, listen, you're always going to have issues. Someone's going to push the boundary um, with dress code. Someone's going to push the boundary with, I'll take Friday and Monday off, instead of just Friday off. But if you have the right leadership culture, you will address that. If you have the right culture in the organization will also self-regulate. You know,
Mm.
if you think about it, the organization, if the right level of maturity exists in the organization, that behavior will be called out, not by the leader, but by the employees themselves. Um, but the more you don't have the right intention, the more employees will know this, and the more employees will probably take advantage of the situation.
Mm.
So it's around building a culture and remember, we said it's hard work. Leadership is hard work. It's not easy.
It is hard work indeed. Let's switch kind of gears a little bit, and I know you are an avid reader. You attend a lot of conferences, and you keep yourself current with what's happening in the rest of the world. So there's this whole kind of fear and this whole debate about technology taking jobs, and people being made redundant and skills getting outdated very soon. How do you see HR functions play a role in preparing their organizations to still be relevant, and for people to still have jobs 5 years from now?
Yeah. Listen, very difficult because I think every year it gets harder and harder to determine what the trends are going to be or where the future is going to be. I will say this though. I think um, irrespective of what our views are on technology, um, we have to embrace it. That's the first thing, because we don't have it. It's in our lives. It's where we are. And if we don't embrace it, it becomes something that will be to the detriment of our work. But if you embrace it and use technology to enhance what you do or to do it differently, so that you can provide a different level of skill to the organization, you will always remain relevant. If you fight it, you will become irrelevant. I want to use the example that almost everyone understands here. You probably at home have better technology than you have at work. You probably have access to applications, whether it is how you run your household, how you do your shopping, how you pay for your bills, that is better than is at work. At work, you're probably still running on old Windows, and you probably still don't have cloud. So organizations aren't doing themselves any favors. You know what I mean? They aren't. I think if you embrace technology and you utilize it, you're also making your employees a lot more. I think you're making employees ready for the change at work. They've already made that change at home. They're already doing everything online, or on an app, not even online. Where at the office, they still have to do things in triplicate, and someone still needs to sign a form somewhere. So I think as soon as we prepare employees and utilize technology, there will be ways that we can enhance the work we do.
Right. And in terms of any advice to organizations kind of getting started on this whole experience journey, what could be things that could go wrong? What is it that they should watch out for? We've obviously spoken about the things they need to do, but
Yeah.
also be careful of some mistakes that can be avoided because some other people have made those same mistakes.
I think, and if we're talking about, there's a great phrase from a guy called S2E4, that did the care and growth model, and he talks about incremental suspension of control, and it's about I think the same way any new apps become popular. You experiment, you upgrade, you experiment, you upgrade. So I think trying to say we're going to find the perfect model and build it and then implement is a mistake. I'd rather say, first of all, experiment with something small, build on it, enhance it, experiment, enhance. And the second thing, involve employees, involve leaders, involve managers. This is not a top-down approach. Engagement is I want to use the word open source. So everyone provides input, and the more input you get, the better your data points are, and the better you can implement the changes. But definitely don't be afraid. You're going to make mistakes. Just don't be afraid. Make the mistakes, move on.
And better to make a small mistake than spend $1 million and
exactly
1.5 years coming up with a fancy 300-page manual on how to improve employee engagement and then find out it doesn't work.
Exactly. Start, go. Ask a question, react. Ask another question, react. That's how you should be doing it.
Last kind of part of this conversation about AI and how organizations and individuals should be prepared about it. There are kind of reports that AI will, and emerging technologies generally, will impact 60% of all jobs in the developed world. Right? So that's a massive, massive disruption. So we're talking about literally a quarter of all jobs being disrupted globally. And 60% in the developed world, because obviously there is more automation there, and the nature of work is more white collared than blue collared. So obviously that's where that's going to happen. We kept hearing about the self-driving truck, which will take the truck driver's job away. That hasn't happened, but the movie writers' jobs are possibly going to go away much faster. So it's come and hit the white collar much faster than we thought it would. How should people prepare in their own careers about this change and how they can manage this change? And as you said, don't fight it. Don't view it with kind of suspicion or with kind of disrespect. But how do you kind of create this synergistic relationship with technology to do your job better?
I think, listen, I'm going to use the word growth mindset so people understand. Growth mindset is being curious, constantly wanting to grow, constantly wanting to develop. And the reason I say that is, listen, as recent as 10 years ago, if you looked at a study from Gartner or from anyone else, they would tell you that all senior roles change by more than 50% every year, which means every 2 to 3 years, that role is either obsolete or changed so much that what you were doing 2 years ago is completely different. So we've always been living with this: roles have changed, jobs have changed, competencies have changed. AI is just another one of those changes. It's, as you said, we need to embrace it. But if we are curious about, if we have a growth mindset, if we understand, so if you think about today, if you just remain the same as you were last year, you've actually gone backwards. Because let's assume whether it's economic growth, whether it's anything else grows at 5 or 6%. If you've remained static, you've gone backwards by, 6 or 7%. And the same as in your role, the same is now. I'm not for a minute minimizing the impact of AI on a white collar job. I'm not for a minute saying that movie writers are overreacting. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying if we have a growth mindset and we understand and we're open about this, how can I do things differently in my job? How can I embrace this? How can I use AI to actually do a better job? How can I use AI if I'm a movie writer to enhance my script, as an example? I don't know what a movie writer does, but that's, my view.
Interesting. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. Any closing thoughts, Fred, on this whole topic about how organizations would kind of undertake this journey and what lies as we go along on this journey?
So I'm gonna like 3 thoughts I try and leave with people. So I think firstly, everyone has the right to do meaningful work. So if you understand that as a leader, that employees that come to work just want to do meaningful work. So your job is to create space for employees to do meaningful work. And the last thing I want to say is, you don't have to do this. You don't have to achieve results or you don't want to achieve results despite employees. You achieve results because of employees. So the investment isn't a choice between, is this a cost? Can I spend it? The investment should be, this is going to give me the results. I'm going to trust that this will give me the results. If you have that mindset of, I will create the space, employees will contribute, and the contribution will lead to success for everyone, then you've got the right mindset.
Amazing. So that was a wonderful discussion. We will post this episode on YouTube and on Spotify, and as and when we hear back queries from our listeners and viewers, we'll pass those on to you, Fred. But it was such a pleasure to kind of dig into the details of many of these things, and especially kind of the biggest takeaway for me was the whole well-being and the wellness space, because especially in the Middle East region, it's not necessarily seen as the most important or a very important way of improving performance and output. So that was a very, very interesting insight, and had a lovely time talking to you as always.
It was awesome, Nasheed. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure there's going to be people that agree or disagree. I'm happy to continue the conversation.
The conversation.
Thank you very much.
Continue. Thank you so much. Thanks, Fred.